Bob Dylan. Please welcome Cate Blanchett. Fox got me cheap, and I got a 3-picture thing, and I did a film called Pushing Tin, which was the first film I'd done in America. I'm hoping it was a stag film, otherwise I'd just spoke out.
The same level as most people did, which is to say I was aware of it because it became such a big thing so quickly. And I didn't see the initial report on 60 Minutes 2 when it aired, but I mean, I think you sort of heard about it within 48 hours just because it was sort of everywhere all of a sudden. And then, you know, it sort of all happened in this 2 weeks, and then it kind of, at least for me, sort of faded away, and nobody really talked about it. And the election happened, and you sort of heard in like January or February that Dan was stepping down, and you know, people sort of drew conclusions to connect them. But it wasn't until I read Mary's book, which came out a year later, that I sort of really learned about it. And what I was sort of struck by was how much I didn't know about something I thought I knew a lot about. So that's kind of how I got into it.
And do you guys remember when this story first broke?
I remember the Abu Ghraib story, and I remember watching the Bush National Guard story, but I wasn't aware of the personal fallout from there. I knew that Dan had stepped down, but I didn't follow the kind of the controversy. So the whole thing was, you know, completely the personal side of the story was completely new to me. Through the conventional route, I'm very, very slow. I've only learned to read English very recently. And I was given a script, and I knew James worked as a writer, obviously, and thought this sounds really interesting. And I sort of, you know, trawled through the internet a bit, so I knew about how to sit down and read it. And then finally I got a call from my agent saying, if you don't read it, they're moving on. And so I read it. and I literally, I mean seriously, when I read a script, I don't know, start reading a play script, it does take me a couple of weeks, because I sort of, it's pathetic, but I sit there and I can't help myself sort of act it out, and act all the characters out. I'm very, very slow. But this one, I ate it alive. And by the time I got to, you know, page 6, I can't stop reading it. And then the minute I put it down, I called and said I'd love to do it.
Did you act out?
Moved on, fortunately.
Did you act out the roles in this one while you were reading it? Because I'd love to see your Dan Rather.
No, you would not. That was actually me up there.
It was.
Thanks, Swapsy.
And Elisabeth, how about you?
Yes, same, just conventional way. I think, you know, for me, it was the combination of the script and the sort of interestingness of the story, and Jamie, and then with Kate and Bob. I mean, you don't say no when that movie happens, no matter what you're doing in it. So it was a no-brainer for me.
You know, you called him Bob, but I actually called him Mr. Redford.
It felt uncomfortable. Don't worry. Weird.
No, you've actually met him, so you can do that. But it's such brilliant casting to cast someone so iconic as Dan Rather. Where did that idea come from? Was it you? Was it a casting director? And he's very selective about his roles. So how did you get him to say yes?
You know, I mean, I actually wrote it for him, with him in mind. I'd written a movie that never got made that he was going to direct years before. So I knew him like a little bit, you know, which is to say I've been in the same room with him a few times, and he was amazing and lovely and exactly, you know. But so I love the kind of idea of, I feel like, you know, Dan Rather and Bob, who it is still weird to call him Bob, but it really, and we had heads of department who worked in movies for 35 years who couldn't bring themselves to do it, and he would say, "Call me Bob," and they would go, "I'm sorry, Mr. Redford, that's not going to happen." But I sort of love this idea of his iconness, playing an icon, and there's a really interesting thing that happens when each of them enter a room, which is sort of, no matter who else is in that room, the gravity kind of bends around them a little bit, you know, and they both kind of occupy this place, I feel like, in Americana. You know what I mean? With that, their voices and their faces just kind of remind you of something you grew up with. So I sort of, and I always sort of thought that whoever plays Dan is the movie's big behind, because, we have such an image of him in our minds. So luckily he said yes.
And Dan and Mary have such a wonderful relationship, and when I see Kate and Mr. Redford up there together, what was it like to work with him? Your chemistry is so strong, and it really does feel like the people have known each other for like 20 years.
Oh, I mean, I think a bit like Mary and Dan, it sort of had this sort of strange father-daughter, but also I had still do, a massive crush on Mr. Redford. So the chemistry is very real. But it was very, it's like he meets you and he's already into the second week of your friendship. He goes right to the point, he's completely open. And I had this strange experience with him on set. Is he'd start talking to me, that there was sort of setting up the shot, and he'd be talking to me, and I'm thinking, gosh, I'm having terrible deja vu. Hadn't had this conversation before, and all of a sudden I realised he's running lines, and he's so disarmingly natural. He wouldn't say, "Come on, do you want to sit down and run it?" He'd sort of talk about stuff around the scene. And then you start running lines, and then you just respond with a line that and so before you knew it, you were into the scene. And he's got this really interesting work process that is amazingly generous but seamless. And so he seems like he's not doing anything, but he's doing everything. But he's doing everything for everyone. And so that was a remarkable presence to work opposite profoundly deep.
She knew about the film and Jamie talked to her, but I didn't hear about this.
Yes, no, I met Mary. I was on stage last year in New York, and so she came with Jenny and Brad, and then that was the first time we met, and then we Skyped a lot. But as you say, because it's not a documentary and it's not a biopic either. I mean, it's a series of events that happens in a very compressed period of time. And so there's a lot of, when I met Mary, having watched a lot of the interviews she'd given, because obviously she's a producer, so her presence, her physical presence, her voice, herself being interviewed, it's a very rare commodity on the internet. And so the things that I'd seen before I met her were very locked down, defensive, a woman in crisis actually. And I found it very hard to reconcile that woman who I'd seen on the internet and the things I'd read about her with this vivacious, engaged, hilarious, serially intelligent, vital, positive, generous woman that I met. And so I knew somewhere in between the two would be where I'd have to invent her. But given that it's not a biopic, I sort of, in a way, had to stop the Skype sessions with Mary because I had to play the thrust and the energy of the film.
And obviously you didn't meet Elisabeth, but
I spoke to a medium. Told you the truth.
and even with someone as iconic as Katharine Hepburn, does it help to have all this material out there about them, or do you find it actually interferes with your own process?
Oh God, no. No, I'm a bowerbird. I'll beg, borrow, and steal from anything and anyone in any place, whatever works, really. But you have to work out what your function is, and so therefore you know which bits to use. But obviously, as opposed to rehearsing a play, where you try things out and you jettison things and you add things as you go until you sort of got a shape and a sense of character and the story arc and what you're doing as an ensemble. You need to keep, I think, when you're making a film, because it's a much more protracted process, you need to keep stimulated. So you don't stop, I don't stop thinking about it or thinking around it as soon as you start filming. I find it useful to keep feeding stuff all the way through the process of making the film.
Are you allowed to talk about the budget and shooting schedule?
We're all, particularly in the office sequence, at CBS in New York, we were there for quite, I think we all went a bit stir crazy. But in a way, I mean, I sort of look for how you can turn that into a positive. And the pressure cooker that all of those, the protagonists were under was probably akin to the pressure that we all felt to get this out. So, in a way, the atmosphere was quite useful. But Jamie is relentlessly positive. I want to punch you.
Outwardly.
Outwardly positive.
And Mark, the husband, yeah.
Yes, and their son. But in the end, it's. I think you judge that well, and that you just. And that's what I love as a working mother myself is that the film doesn't dwell on that. It's not a big issue. Of course she's a working mother. Of course she's pulled between wanting to be with her child, but we don't need to sort of justify her absence continually, which I think, thank God, we finally moved on from that. As filmmakers and actors, we have to get on with the story.
Bob knows everybody. So Bob, of course, said...
Bob knows Dylan.
And he sort of will say, and he'll have these conversations with you where he'll also say, he's like, I was talking to Robbie Robertson. Do you know Robbie? And you go, no, we don't know. Of course we don't know Robbie Robertson. But Bob said, well, I know Dan. And I said, of course you know Dan, obviously. And so he's known Dan since the 70s. So I know he called Dan up and he said, we had told Dan before this, we didn't just spring it on him. Robert Redford's calling. So Bob called him and said, I'm playing you. And Dan said, oh, I'm very excited. Thank you so much. And Bob said, don't thank me yet. So.
It's funny because when people play real life people, you always hear how that person was disappointed. Like they wanted someone else to play them. And I think this is the one movie where everyone must have been like, I got Cate Blanchett? I bet people were very happy.
They were very happy. I can confirm they were very happy.
And have they seen the movie? What's been Mary and Dan's feedback?
Yeah, no, they've both seen the film. We showed it to them before it premiered in Toronto, and they both were very positive. It was really emotional for Mary, there was a lot of tears and there was some wine. But she really liked it, and she really, it was a big moment for me to see her do that. She held my hand the last hour.
But also, she's her own worst critic.
Oh yeah.
I think that's the interesting thing, and she's a perfectionist, and so I think that she was pleased that it's not a love letter. It actually just in quite a factual way. I mean, he was talking about it's not a documentary, but everything in the film happened, and it's just that it perhaps told from more one person's perspective because you have to have a protagonist in a film. You have to have someone guiding you through the story. But yeah, so I think probably she was relieved that it was out there.
Yeah, no, and the amazing thing in perfect sort of Mary fashion too, I'm going to tell you this, her first reaction was like, oh, this would be good for Dan.
Yeah.
This is, she wasn't even sort of thinking of herself, she was thinking about Dan's reaction to it and what he'll be, and so.
Yeah. And this way, actually. I mean, sometimes Jamie would come up on set and just go, and I go, yeah, we've got to go again. And I think when you are in sync with one another, it's often hard to articulate. It's hard for a director to articulate exactly what texture is missing. And so sometimes it says, yeah, I know there's something wrong, not nothing's wrong, but it's not quite working, let's just go again. And sometimes it's simply about speed. Sometimes it's thinking faster, or sometimes it's, when a director says, I think you need to not deliver that line directly to that person, to try to be more indirect. I mean, and when I was working with Scorsese on The Aviator, he would literally come up with a shopping list and say, like the script, and he'd read the line and go, yep, and he'd tick that, and he'd read the next line and go, yep, tick that, and then he'd get to the next line and say, I think we should do this a little faster. And then he'd put a cross next to that, and he'd go on to the next line. And so he'd work through it methodically. Every director has a different process, but also every scene has a different need. And the thing I marvel at the directors is that every actor works slightly differently. We all have our fears, we all have our habits, we all have, our stumbling blocks and the things that we find difficult. And so to get everyone in the same scene is the most important thing. And I love the time spent you know, when everyone, before everyone goes off to hair and makeup, when you get to work out what it is that is going on between you all. And to me, that's the most creative time between the actors and the director, because you get to say, this is what the scene is about, this is the given circumstances, and you ask all the questions, you don't answer any of them, you kind of vaguely block it, and then everyone goes off into the percolation time of hair and makeup, and then you can come in and go, because you've already kind of set the imaginative life of the actors, you set that on fire. I think it's great, when you're working with a director like Jamie, who doesn't lock things down and who has the courage to say, I don't know, actually. I think we'll just need to go again.
By the way, when I gave your introduction, you didn't hear it, but when I said this was your feature debut as a director, there was an, oh, because it's such an accomplished movie.
Thank you so much.
Was the experience exactly what you expected? Harder, maybe easier?
Disappointing.
Disappointing on massive levels with the cast. It was an amazing experience. It wasn't easier, certainly not easier. It was really hard. I think that the thing that struck me about it was the level of concentration, the sustained level of concentration that every part of it takes. But it was also the exciting thing. I mean, and I know I sort of mocked for being relentlessly positive, which I am, but maybe just because I could, but I'm so excited we got to make a movie. So I would show up and be like, we're making a movie! This is amazing! It's amazing! It's like, we're gonna save this car wash, And so that was so great.
Connecting to the language, particularly in a film like this, where you have to be on top of the language. Often when there's too much thinking time, the air wouldn't come out of the scene. So yes, and relaxation's vital. Although even when you're playing, a tense scene like Black Rock, you have to be sort of simultaneously relaxed but ready and on top of things, particularly because of the level of stress and anxiety and the focus. Forget the pressure that they're under, because they're being sort of moral. They're under sort of they're undergoing character assassinations, really. So there was sort of their whole being was on the line. But just on a day-to-day basis, working in '62, they have to turn these stories around really, really quickly. So they have to think. You have to, they're supercharged. So I think it's getting the character's energy into your voice and body is once you find that energetic place to be. I think that's it's certainly I find it very helpful.
Yeah, I sort of had a backwards thing where I did theater later. I sort of started in film and TV and then did theater. So for me, it was really interesting only using my face, and not worrying about how loud I was and not worrying about my voice, and then going and starting to do theater when I was like 19, and done a few plays since then, and being able to sort of then take what I've learned through doing theater and through that process and working with voice coaches and having to be on a stage and project and all that, and taking that back to the smaller medium and realizing like how many more tools that I had than I didn't even realize. And some of those things are voice and relaxation, or the juxtaposition between tension and relaxation and all of that. And I think it also depends if you're doing an accent or if you're doing a dialect. You're sort of way more conscious of your voice than you usually are. For Top of the Lake, doing an Australian accent.
Which was amazing.
I'm gonna die and go to heaven now. Good night, world. Thank you. For me, that accent had to be really grounded in order to do the Australian accent. I had to sort of lower my voice. And so it really allowed me to be more in touch with my body in a way that I usually wasn't when I was, doing just TV-based acting. So yeah, I think it is a big.
Oh gosh. Chekhov is excruciatingly difficult because it's like, I don't know if any of you have ever done a clowning workshop where you literally stand on stage and they go, be funny. And then you do something and go, that's not funny. And you go, okay, that's what Chekhov is like. And I think you can understand why it's done by ensembles who work together for 10, 20 years. And with a Hungarian director who directed a production for the syndicated company of Uncle Vanya, had just come off doing a production of Three Sisters, where the Three Sisters have been playing roles for 12 years. And finally Irina was saying, "Hey, I'm too old to play this role, I can't play it anymore." And he said, "No, finally you're getting it." And it's because it's something, even that was him being kind. But there's something about, because nothing actually happens, you're watching people being. But when I said that, I don't mean indulging. They're acting upon one another, but the levels of effect and the performances are so subtle. And what happens, the textures that evolve over time, which can only evolve over time with Chekhov, means that when you first embark upon performing it, it's absolutely excruciating. It doesn't work. So that's, I think, probably playing anything in Chekhov is